The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across nearly 3 miles of polished black stone. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of worlds sat in their designated sections, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some had scales. Some had wings. Others existed as clouds of living gas contained within magnetic fields. They had gathered here for 12,000 years to decide the fate of civilizations, and in all that time, they had never known fear. Ambassador Kethvorin of the Volhari Dominion walked to the central platform with the confidence of a species that had ruled the galaxy since before most worlds had developed fire. His 4 eyes swept across the assembly as he prepared to deliver his routine update on what the Council called the Human Containment Operation. It was supposed to be a simple report. The humans were dying. Their planet was blockaded. Their colony ships had been destroyed. Everything was going according to plan. The Volhari had been the ones to discover humanity almost a century ago. A small blue world on the outer edge of the galaxy, filled with creatures that bred too fast and thought too quickly, and refused to accept their place in the natural order. The Council had seen species like this before. They were dangerous. They needed to be eliminated before they could spread dot, so the Council had voted, as they always did, and humanity had been marked for quiet extermination. No great war. No dramatic confrontation. Simply a blockade around their solar system. The destruction of any ship that tried to leave, and the patient waiting for starvation and resource depletion to do the rest. It had worked on 17 other species before. It would work on the humans. Kethvorin opened his mouth to begin his report when the lights in the Great Hall flickered. A murmur passed through the assembled delegates. The lights on the Sara Prime had not flickered in 8,000 years. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, projected by the Council's own communication systems. But the image it showed was not from any Council world. It showed a ship. A human ship. And it was not trapped behind any blockade. The vessel hung in space like a blade made of darkness. It was enormous, nearly twice the size of the largest Council warships. Its hull was covered in angles and edges that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And it was moving through space in a way that should have been impossible, leaving no trail. Making no sound on any sensor the Council possessed, Commander Daniel Shaw stood on the bridge of that ship and watched the same holographic display from the other side. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands, and he had waited 30 years for this moment. The ship he commanded was called the Retribution, and it was the first of many. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Martin monitored the communication systems with quiet efficiency. She was young for her rank, barely 35, but she had grown up in the underground cities that humanity had built after the blockade began. She had never seen Earth's sky without the shadow of Council patrol ships blocking out the stars. She had trained her entire life for the war that was about to begin. The Council had made a mistake. They had assumed that humanity would simply accept their fate. They had assumed that a species trapped on a single world would slowly fade away, too weak and too broken to fight back. They had not understood what humans were capable of when they had nothing left to lose. For 30 years, humanity had hidden. They had built their ships in secret facilities carved into asteroids, powered by energy sources the Council did not know existed. They had developed weapons based on principles of physics that the elder species had declared impossible. They had trained their soldiers in simulations so realistic that the line between practice and reality had ceased to exist, and they had remembered. Every ship the Council destroyed, every colony that was wiped out, every child who died in the famines that followed the blockade. Humanity recorded it all, stored it all, and let it fuel the fire that burned in their hearts. Admiral Kevin Brooks received the signal that the Retribution had been detected at his command post in the asteroid belt. He was an older man, nearly 70, and he had been planning this war since before Daniel Shaw was born. He had lost his wife and 3 children when the Council destroyed the Mars colony. He had spent every day since then preparing for revenge. The fleet he commanded numbered in the thousands. Each ship was crewed by men and women who had similar stories, similar losses, similar reasons to hate the Council with every fiber of their being. They were not an army of conquest. They were an army of retribution. Kevin activated the fleet-wide communication channel and spoke in a voice that carried no emotion. The time had come. Operation Homecoming was beginning. 30 years of preparation would finally be put to use. Back in the Great Hall of the Council, chaos was spreading. Delegates screamed in their various languages. Some tried to flee. Others demanded explanations that no one could provide. High Counselor Marath Saul of the Zenthari Collective called for order, but his voice was lost in the noise. Cathvorin stood frozen at the central platform, his 4 eyes fixed on the image of the human warship. He had been the one to recommend the blockade strategy. He had assured the Council that humanity posed no real threat, that they would die quietly like all the others. He had been wrong. The holographic display changed. The single ship was joined by another, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. Human vessels poured out of what appeared to be tears in the fabric of space itself, each one as dark and deadly as the first. The Council's sensors could not track them all. Commander Daniel Shaw watched his fleet assemble and allowed himself a small smile. The Council had spent a century trying to exterminate his species. They had killed billions of his people. They had destroyed humanity's dreams of reaching the stars. Now humanity had reached the stars anyway, and they had not come to negotiate. They had not come to find a peaceful solution. They had come to show the galaxy what happened when you tried to destroy the human race. Lisa Martin looked up from her console and reported that all ships had successfully transitioned to real space. The fleet was in position. The Council had detected them. There was no going back now. Daniel nodded and gave the order that would change the galaxy forever. The war had begun. The Volhari border world of Kethaner burned beneath a sky filled with human warships. The orbital defense platforms that had protected the planet for 6,000 years were nothing but debris now, scattered across the upper atmosphere like fallen leaves. The ground forces that had been stationed there had surrendered within hours, their weapons useless against technology they could not understand. Admiral Kevin Brooks watched the planet from the observation deck of his command ship, the Judgment. He felt nothing. No joy. No satisfaction. Only a cold determination to see this war through to its end. The Volhari had been the ones to design the blockade around Earth. They had been the ones to destroy the refugee ships that tried to escape. Their ambassador had called humanity a plague that needed to be cleansed from the galaxy. Now humanity was the one doing the cleansing. Captain Amanda Price led the ground assault with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a storm. Her Marines moved through the alien cities in perfect formation, their powered armor making them immune to the weapons the Volhari defenders tried to use against them. She had lost her entire family in the destruction of the Jupiter station. She had been 17 years old, alone in an escape pod, watching through a tiny window as council ships fired on civilian transports. She did not take prisoners. The Volhari were a proud species. They had ruled their section of the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. They had never known defeat, never experienced invasion, never felt the terror of watching their world burn around them. They learned all of these things in a single day. Intelligence. Director Christopher Lane coordinated the operation from his station aboard the Retribution. He was a quiet man with a talent for finding information that others wanted to keep hidden. For the past 20 years, he had been intercepting Council communications, mapping their defense networks, and identifying their weaknesses. He knew more about the elder species than most of them knew about themselves. The Council had always believed their communications were secure. They had been using the same encryption methods for thousands of years, and no species had ever managed to break them. But Christopher had grown up reading the messages that described how his people were being systematically murdered. He had motivation that no other codebreaker in history had ever possessed. He listened now as panic spread through Council space. The Valhari were calling for help. The Karathi were mobilizing their fleet. The Inari were trying to organize a coordinated defense. But it was too late. Humanity had spent 30 years planning this war, and they had accounted for every possible response. Commander Patrick Moore led the second wave of the assault. His target was the Valhari shipyards at Dexna, where the Council built the patrol vessels that had enforced the blockade around Earth. He had served on one of the few human ships that had managed to survive the early days of the blockade, hiding in the asteroid belt while Council patrols hunted them like animals. The shipyards were defended by over 200 Council warships. Patrick destroyed them in less than 3 hours. Human weapons technology had advanced far beyond anything the Council had imagined. The elder species had grown complacent in their dominance, assuming that their ancient designs were the pinnacle of military engineering. They had not innovated in centuries. Humanity had done nothing but innovate. The news of the Valhari defeat spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had lived under Council rule for millennia watched in disbelief as one of the most powerful empires in known space crumbled in a matter of days. Some felt hope for the first time in their lives. Others felt only fear, wondering if they would be next. Fleet Admiral Nicole Grant commanded the third wave of the assault. Her target was the Karathi hegemony, the military backbone of the Council alliance. The Karathi were warriors by nature, bred for combat over countless generations. They had never lost a war in their entire history. Nicole was not impressed. She had grown up in the underground bunkers beneath the ruins of New York, where the survivors of the Council's initial attacks had gathered to rebuild. She had seen her mother die from a disease that could have been cured easily if the Council had not destroyed Earth's medical supply ships. She had sworn an oath on her mother's grave that one day the Council would pay for what they had done. The Karathi fleet met the human armada at the border of their space. They outnumbered the humans nearly 3-1. Their ships were larger, more heavily armored, designed for the kind of brutal close-quarters combat that the Karathi preferred. Their commanders were veterans of 100 campaigns against lesser species. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the Karathi fleet had been reduced to scattered debris, and their home world lay defenseless before the human armada. Their supreme commander, a massive creature covered in natural armor and carrying ceremonial weapons that had been used in combat for 10,000 years, sent a message of unconditional surrender. Nicole accepted the surrender, but she made it clear that the Karathi would be held accountable for their role in the attempted extermination of humanity. There would be trials. There would be justice. The price of genocide was not something that could be paid with a simple surrender. Back on Earth, the survivors watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy. For the first time in a century, they allowed themselves to hope. The blockade was broken. The Council was falling. Humanity was not going to die quietly after all. Admiral Kevin Brooks received the reports of victory with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything else. The Valhari were broken. The Karathi had surrendered. The Inari had attempted to flee into deep space, but human ships had been waiting for them in the darkness between stars. 3 of the 7 elder species had fallen in less than a month. The Council that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years was on the verge of collapse, but Kevin knew that the war was not over yet. The Council still held Thasara Prime, the capital world where the Great Hall stood. The remaining elder species were gathering their forces there for a final stand. The hardest battles were still to come. He gave the order to begin the next phase of the operation. The human fleet changed course, leaving the conquered territories behind and heading toward the heart of Council space. They had come too far to stop now. The Council had wanted humanity to die. Instead, humanity had come for them. The Great Hall of the Sara Prime had never been so quiet. The thousands of delegates who normally filled its vast spaces had fled, leaving only the core members of the Council to face the crisis alone. The 7 elder species had ruled the galaxy together for 12,000 years, and now 4 of them gathered to decide how to survive the next 12 days. High Counselor Marath Sol of the Zinthari Collective sat in his ancient chair and tried to process what had happened. The Zinthari were beings of pure thought, existing as patterns of energy contained within crystalline bodies. They had evolved beyond physical needs millions of years ago, and they had always considered themselves the wisest of the elder species. They had been the ones to design the council system, to create the rules by which civilizations were judged worthy of existence or marked for elimination. They had marked humanity for elimination without a second thought. Now Marathsel wondered if that single decision would be the end of everything his species had built. The Velhari were broken. The Karathi had surrendered. The Inari had been hunted down in the void between stars. 3 of the 7 elder species had fallen to an enemy that was supposed to be dying. Counselor Vetran of the Scythian Assembly coiled her serpentine body around her speaking platform and tried to project calm. The Scythians were traitors and diplomats, skilled at finding common ground between warring factions. They had negotiated peace treaties that ended conflicts lasting centuries. Surely, they could find some way to reason with the humans. She proposed immediate negotiation. Perhaps the humans could be appeased with territorial concessions. Perhaps they could be offered reparations for the losses they had suffered. Perhaps the individuals directly responsible for the extermination orders could be handed over for punishment. There had to be something the humans wanted that did not involve the complete destruction of Council Space Ambassador Keth Voren, who had somehow survived the destruction of his fleet and escaped to the Sara Prime. Listened to her proposal with growing despair. He had seen the human ships up close. He had watched them tear through Velhari defenses like they were made of paper. He had heard the communications from his dying cruises. They begged for mercy that never came. The humans did not want territory. They did not want reparations. They wanted revenge. The 4th elder species present was the Thalari synthesis, a collective consciousness made up of billions of interconnected minds. They spoke with one voice through their physical representative, a biomechanical construct that served as their interface with individual beings. The Thalari had always been the most logical of the elder species, approaching every problem with cold calculation. Their calculation now was simple. The Council could not win this war. Human technology had advanced beyond anything the elder species possessed. Human tactics were unpredictable, creative, and ruthlessly effective. Human motivation was fueled by a century of suffering and loss. The only logical course of action was to surrender immediately and hope for mercy. Marath Sol rejected this proposal. The Zinthari had never surrendered. They had never bowed to a lesser species. They would find a way to defeat the humans, just as they had defeated every threat that had come before. But even as he spoke, the reports kept coming in. Human ships had been spotted at the edge of the Thasara system. The fleet that had been assembled to defend the Council homeworld was scrambling to take up defensive positions. The final battle was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated. Fleet Admiral Nicole Grant stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and prepared to deliver humanity's response to the Council's diplomatic overtures. She had received their messages, their offers, their pleas. She had read them all carefully, considered them all thoroughly, and rejected them all completely. She activated the communication system and broadcast her message across every channel in Council space. Her face appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, in the Great Hall of the Sar Prime, on surviving Council warships, on worlds that had lived under Council rule for millennia. Her voice was steady and cold. There would be no negotiation. There would be no mercy. The Council had spent a century trying to exterminate the human race. They had killed billions of innocent people. They had destroyed humanity's colonies, murdered their children, and tried to starve their species into extinction. Now humanity would return the favor. Nicole listed the crimes that the Council would be held accountable for: the destruction of the Mars colony, the bombing of the refugee ships, the biological weapons deployed against the underground resistance, the systematic murder of every human being who tried to escape the blockade. She spoke for nearly an hour, reading from records that humanity had kept throughout their century of suffering. When she finished, she made humanity's terms clear. The Council would surrender unconditionally. The elder species would disarm completely. Those responsible for the crimes against humanity would face trial and punishment. And the Council system itself would be dismantled, forever. In the Great Hall, Marath Sal listened to the humans' terms and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. True, paralyzing fear. The Zentari had existed for millions of years. They had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. They had always believed themselves to be eternal. Now he understood that eternity was an illusion. Everything ended eventually. And for the Council, the end had arrived in the form of a species they had tried to destroy. Counselor Vetran made one last attempt at negotiation. She contacted the human fleet directly, bypassing official channels, pleading for a chance to discuss peaceful solutions. She reminded them that violence only bred more violence, that revenge was a cycle that could never truly be broken. The response she received was a single sentence: humanity remembered everything. The Council had 48 hours to surrender. After that, the human fleet would begin its assault on the Sar Prime, and there would be no more offers. No more chances, no more hope. The elder species that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years sat in their ancient hall and waited for the end to come. The sky above the Sar Prime turned black with human warships. They came in waves, thousands of vessels emerging from the darkness of space, like a storm that had been building for a century. The orbital defense network that protected the Council homeworld opened fire immediately, filling the void with energy beams and projectiles and weapons that had defended this world since before humanity learned to walk upright. Commander Patrick Moore led the Vanguard fleet straight into the heart of the defense network. His pilots flew patterns that the Council's tactical computers classified as impossible, threading through kill zones that should have destroyed them instantly. Human reaction times were faster than any species the Council had ever encountered. Human creativity allowed them to find solutions that no algorithm could predict. Human determination made them willing to take risks that no other species would consider. The orbital platforms began to fall one by one. Massive structures that had taken centuries to build were reduced to rubble in minutes. The Council's defensive fleet, gathered from the surviving elder species, moved to intercept the human attackers. They outnumbered the human vanguard 5-1. It did not matter. Admiral Kevin Brooks watched the battle unfold from the command deck of the Judgment. He had spent 30 years planning this assault, running simulations, studying Council tactics, preparing for every possible scenario. The reality was playing out almost exactly as he had predicted. The Council forces were brave and well-trained, but they were fighting against an enemy that had nothing left to lose. Major Christina Wells waited in the landing craft with her assault team as the orbital battle raged above them. She was a small woman with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She had grown up in the tunnels beneath the ruins of Chicago, where the survivors of the Council's attacks had hidden for decades. She had never seen sunlight until she was 12 years old. Her target was the Great Assembly Hall itself, the building where the Council had voted to exterminate her species. She had studied its layout until she could navigate it blindfolded. She knew where the Council members would try to hide when the fighting started. She knew how to find them. The signal came that the orbital defenses had been neutralized. The landing craft launched from the human warships, descending toward the surface of the SAR Prime like metal rain. Anti-aircraft fire rose to meet them. But the human pilots were too skilled, too fast, too determined. Christina's craft touched down in the plaza outside the Great Assembly Hall. The doors opened and her Marines poured out, their powered armor making them nearly invulnerable to the weapons the Council's guards carried. She led them forward, stepping over the bodies of defenders who had died trying to stop them. The halls of the Great Assembly had never known war. For 12,000 years, this building had been a place of diplomacy and governance, where civilizations were judged and fates were decided. Now it echoed with gunfire and explosions and the screams of the dying. Christina moved through corridors lined with monuments to species that no longer existed. The Council had eliminated 17 spacefaring civilizations before they discovered humanity. Their names were inscribed on these walls, treated as cautionary tales about the dangers of allowing aggressive species to survive. She wondered if the Council would add humanity to this list. And then she realized that there would be no Council left to add anything. Commander Daniel Shaw coordinated the assault from orbit, directing his ships to provide support wherever it was needed. The Council's ground forces were putting up a desperate defense, but they were being pushed back on every front. Human Marines were fighting their way through the government district, the military headquarters, the communication centers. One by one, the pillars of Council power were falling. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Martin intercepted a transmission from inside the Great Assembly Hall. The Council members were retreating to their inner sanctum, a fortified chamber deep beneath the building that had been designed to survive any disaster. They believed they would be safe there. Lisa passed the information to Christina's assault team. The fighting intensified as the Marines approached the inner sanctum. Council guards threw themselves at the human attackers with the desperation of beings who knew they were defending the last hope of their civilization. Some of them had served the Council for centuries, dedicating their lives to protecting the elder species. They died believing in a cause that had already been lost. Lieutenant Commander Benjamin Hart led the breach team that finally reached the doors of the inner sanctum. He was a young man, barely 30, but he had been training for this moment since he was old enough to hold a weapon. His father had died in the destruction of the Europa colony. His mother had died in the famines that followed. He was the last of his family, and he carried their memory with him into this final battle. The doors of the inner sanctum were made of materials that could withstand nuclear weapons. They were protected by security systems that had been designed by the greatest minds of 7 species working together. They were supposed to be impenetrable. Benjamin's team breached them in less than 4 minutes. Inside, they found the Council members huddled together in the darkness. High Counselor Marathsol of the Xanthari, Counselor Veteran of the Scythian Assembly, Ambassador Cathvoran of the Volhari Dominion, the representative of the Thalari Synthesis, and others, lesser officials and advisors who had believed themselves safe in the heart of Council power. They looked up at the human soldiers with expressions that ranged from terror to disbelief to resignation. Some of them had lived for thousands of years. Some of them had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. None of them had ever imagined that they would end like this, captured by a species they had tried to destroy. Benjamin secured the chamber and reported that the Council had been taken. The battle for the SAR Prime was effectively over. The war that had lasted for a century was finally reaching its end. Outside, the guns fell silent. The last pockets of Council resistance surrendered or were destroyed. Human soldiers walked through streets that had never known the footsteps of an enemy, past buildings that had stood since before humanity existed. The Council that had frozen in terror when humanity first arrived was now in chains. And the galaxy watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. The trial was held in the Great Assembly Hall itself, in the same chamber where the Council had voted to exterminate the human race a century before. The irony was intentional. Admiral Kevin Brooks had ordered the hall restored to its original condition, the damage from the battle repaired, the lights returned to their ancient brightness. He wanted the galaxy to see that humanity did not destroy blindly. They destroyed with purpose. The surviving Council members stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by human guards and watched by cameras that broadcast the proceedings to every world in known space. High Counselor Marath Sol of the Zentari stood with his crystalline body dimmed. His usual radiance faded to a pale shadow of what it had been. Counselor Veteran of the Scythian Assembly coiled motionless on her platform, her scales losing their luster. Ambassador Keth Voran of the Velhari Dominion could not meet the eyes of his captors. Fleet Admiral Nicole Grant stood before them and read the charges in a voice that carried across the galaxy. Genocide, the systematic extermination of 17 spacefaring species, the attempted annihilation of humanity, the deliberate murder of 14 billion human beings over the course of the century-long blockade, war crimes, crimes against sentient life, crimes against the fundamental principles of existence itself. The evidence was overwhelming. Christopher Lane had spent 20 years intercepting Council communications, and he had saved every message, every order, every casual discussion about how to most efficiently eliminate the human species. The Council members could not deny what they had done. They could only try to justify it. Marathsel spoke first. He explained that the Council had been protecting the galaxy from a dangerous and aggressive species. Humanity bred too fast, expanded too quickly, and refused to accept the natural order that the elder species had established. They had been a threat to the stability of civilized space. The extermination had been necessary for the greater good. Admiral Kevin Brooks listened to this justification with a face carved from stone. He had heard similar arguments before in the messages that Council commanders had sent while destroying human ships. They had always believed they were doing the right thing. They had always found ways to convince themselves that genocide was acceptable. Nicole continued reading the charges. Each name of a destroyed colony, each number representing lives lost, each record of a child who had starved because Council ships intercepted food supplies. The reading took nearly 6 hours, and by the end, even some of the Council members who had tried to maintain their composure were visibly shaken. Counselor Vetran made her final plea. She spoke of the possibility of reconciliation, of healing, of building a new future where past crimes could be forgiven in the interest of peace. She reminded the humans that revenge was a cycle that could never truly end, that violence only bred more violence. That mercy was the mark of a truly civilized species. Commander Daniel Shaw, who had fired the first shot of the war, stepped forward to respond. He was not a politician or a diplomat. He was a soldier who had spent his entire life preparing to fight for the survival of his species. But his words were chosen carefully, and they would be remembered for generations to come. Humanity had not come to rule the galaxy. They had not come to replace the Council with their own empire. They had not come to conquer or to dominate or to prove their superiority over other species. They had come to ensure that what happened to humanity would never happen to anyone else. The Council system would be dismantled. The elder species would no longer have the authority to decide which civilizations deserved to exist and which deserved to die. No single group would ever again possess the power to exterminate an entire species because they found them inconvenient or threatening or simply different. Humanity would stand watch over the galaxy, not as masters, but as guardians, not as rulers, but as protectors. They would remember what had been done to them, and they would make sure that the memory was never forgotten. High Counselor Marath Sol asked one final question. Would there be executions? Kevin Brooks answered him directly. Those who had given the orders for genocide would face the ultimate punishment. Those who had carried out those orders with enthusiasm and cruelty would face the same fate. Those who had simply followed instructions without question would be judged individually, based on the specifics of their actions. The Council had believed itself to be above consequences. They had believed that their power would protect them from ever having to answer for their crimes. They had been wrong. The executions took place at dawn on the Sar Prime, in the plaza outside the Great Assembly Hall where human Marines had landed just days before. High Counselor Marath Sol was the first to face judgment, his crystalline form shattered by weapons specifically designed for his species. Ambassador Keth Voren followed, and then others, their various alien forms meeting various designed ends. Some of the galaxy watched in satisfaction. Species that had lived under Council tyranny for millennia saw justice being done for the first time in living memory. Others watched in horror, seeing the death of an order that had lasted for 12,000 years. And still others watched in fear, wondering what kind of galaxy would emerge from the ashes of Council rule. Captain Amanda Price stood in the plaza as the executions concluded, her face unreadable. She had lost her family to the Council's attacks. She had fought through 3 worlds to reach this moment. She had expected to feel something when it was over. Satisfaction, closure, peace. She felt nothing but exhaustion. The war was over. Humanity had survived. But the future was uncertain, and the work of building a new order had only just begun. Commander Daniel Shaw returned to the bridge of the Retribution as the fleet prepared to begin its long patrol of the galaxy. Lisa Martin reported that all systems were functioning normally, that the crew was ready for whatever came next. He looked out at the stars that humanity had fought so hard to reach and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The Council had frozen in terror when they realized what humanity had come to do. They had believed themselves to be the masters of the galaxy, untouchable and eternal. They had been wrong about everything. Humanity had come for total eradication of the system that had tried to destroy them. And they had succeeded. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in a century, the survivors of Earth could look up at the stars and know that their children would have a future among them. The age of the Council was over. The age of humanity had just begun.